Question. So you can go ahead and use. All right, test. I know there's someone on the phone, and Kevin, it looks like you've joined. Can you both hear me? Kevin, you may have to chat it in.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you as well.
All right, great. Thanks. Who's on the phone?
Julie Balaga.
Oh, hi, Julie. How are you?
Hello. It's an interesting thought what you're doing tonight.
Thanks. All right, we're going to get started in a few minutes. We're expecting pretty good crowd.
Good.
But so, Julie, it would help since you're on the phone. I can't mute you, so if you could mute yourself so that we don't hear any background noise, that'd be great.
I should do what to myself? I'm on my regular phone. What should I do?
Can you mute your phone?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, thanks.
I have to find it. Interesting question. Mark,
yeah.
on a regular old-fashioned phone, I don't see the word mute. I should go on my cell phone then, huh? Well, that's
on a
lovely.
regular phone. I don't know. I mean, it's been on your phone. They're.
Oh, that's Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Julie's looking for advice on how to mute a regular house phone, and without seeing the phone, I don't.
Yeah, I don't know how. Yeah, I'll keep looking.
So when
I'm gonna have feedback because I'm still getting.
Right. So once
once I'm done, I'll just go over there.
Or just hit mute.
No, mute only mutes my the microphone, not the speaker. I'm still going to be able to hear people.
I see. Okay.
Right. So that's what I was giving you the feedback. So I'll just go over far enough away that there's no feedback.
Yeah. I hit mute on this again.
Yeah.
If I become a problem, let me know and I'll just hang up.
No, you'll be.
Except I really want to hear what you have to say.
It's been a problem for 30 years.
I know. So what else is new? Put it on mute. You on mute.
All right, folks. We've got about a third of the people who signed up, and so we'll just wait a few more minutes before we get started. All right, we'll give it 2 more minutes. Are you muted?
Yes. I'm muted.
Are you sure? I thought you were on, but you were just turned down.
Yeah. Look, it says mute.
That would be muted. This would be the way
Right,
up
no.
of you recording.
Can I put this on the table? All right. It's 7:05, so we'll get started. Can somebody who's on the phone just let me know if you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
I can hear you.
Very good. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We've invited you tonight to be part of this legislative briefing because you are amongst our most committed supporters, and we thank you for that. Over the last several years, readers across Connecticut have increasingly turned to the Mirror for credible information about policy and government and politics that they can trust. And two of the reasons they turn to us are Mark Pazniokas and Phaneuf. And tonight, Mark and Keith are going to share their reflections about the upcoming legislative session that starts on Wednesday. Mark and Keith are each going to present their reflections for about 10 minutes each, and then we will invite you to submit questions for the two of them via the chat box that is on your on your screen. For those of you on the phone, we will take questions by phone, by audio, but we'll have to just kind of organize that and intersperse that with some of the questions that come in over the chat. All right, so with that, we're going to turn it over to Mark.
Actually, we're going to turn over. Well, the budget is issue number 1, number 2.
Maybe they're just getting organized.
We heard Bruce, but we can't hear Mark.
Okay, let's do this.
All right, let's do this. All right. Okay.
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. All right.
Generally, everybody good?
Okay.
Oh, okay. I'll give it a shot. If it's bad or anybody can't hear, let me know and we'll start over. Probably the theme that you're going to hear me go back to again and again to try to sum up the governor's presentation today and where state finances are going heading into the General Assembly session is a quote of the governor's, and that is, really there are few choices left. If any of you have had the misfortune of hearing me talk about the budget before, by now you know that what's coming to a head are 70 to 80 years of improper savings habits on the part of the state of Connecticut for the retirement benefits programs that we offer to public sector employees. We're talking about pensions, for state employees and for municipal school teachers, and we're talking about retirement health care for state employees. In a minute, I'll go back to those, but just keep in the back of your head to start that what these are doing is they are eating up all the growth in the budget. And in particular, we have projections that they're going to be putting unprecedented pressure on state finances, demanding more resources than ever before for at least the next 15 years. So if you think this is bad, this is really just the beginning of a long-term trend. And this is really what Governor Malloy has grappled with pretty much since his first year on the job. At first glance, he's dealing with a relatively simple deficit. To remind everybody, the General Assembly passed a new 2-year budget last October. They were a little late. We were already 3.5, 4 months into the fiscal year when they passed that 2-year plan. And right now, it looks like if we don't make adjustments, the second year of that plan, the fiscal year that begins July 1, would run about 1% in deficit. So I might say 165, 170 million doesn't sound like much money, but in the context of an $18 billion general fund, a $20.7 billion budget, that doesn't seem so bad, especially when you consider the fact that I said we haven't been funding our retirement programs for 7 decades. But that biennial budget was really built on what I call the deferral plan. It was designed to move burdens into the next governor's term. The legislature passed a plan that really sets up our next governor and the 2019 General Assembly to do the heavy lifting. So just to give you an idea of what's happening now, even though we only have to patch, excuse me, a hole of about 1%, you're going to hear a lot of talk about revenue. Remember, I said there are few choices left. Today, the governor rolled out a budget, and he proposed raising the income tax, not by raising rates, simply by clamping down on credits. We're talking about eliminating the property tax credit that goes to middle-income households, offset some of the money you've paid to your local cities and towns. We're talking about reversing new tax cuts that we just passed in October, income tax cuts to exempt greater portions of Social Security, pension earnings, and annuities. We're talking about increases in the hotel tax, real estate conveyance tax. To keep the special transportation fund solvent, the governor wants to phase in over 4 years a 7-cent increase in the retail gasoline tax. I also would remind everyone, we have a wholesale tax as well. When the gas is brought to your local filling station, it's taxed. That's built into the price. And then you have the retail tax as well. That, by the way, is just a buffer to get us, according to the governor's budget, to electronic tolls, which he's proposing be installed on highways within the next 4 years or so. But there's a third area to patch up. The current fiscal year that we're in, the first year of this new biennial budget, has also sprung a leak to the tune of about $240 million, and people are forgetting that the governor in December recommended raising the sales tax to 6.9%, excuse me, having a special surcharge of more than 7% for restaurant transactions. Those proposals are still on the books as well. That is all just to get us past the election. Why? Sorry. About 20 years ago, sorry, I'm being told to get a frog in my throat. About 20 years ago, if you looked at the state budget, you just looked at 4 line items. The 3 retirement benefits I talked about, the 2 pension payments, pension funds, and the retirement health care. If you looked at those 3 line items in general fund debt service, the money we pay on the funds we borrow to build schools, to fix state buildings, that ate up about 12% of the budget 2 decades ago. It's already eating up 33% today, and it's about to enter a period where that grows at an astronomical rate. Some projections have it over that 15-year period, consuming more than half the budget. Think about the other so-called fixed expenses we haven't even talked about, things like state employee payroll, health benefits for people on the job today, Medicaid. We haven't even factored that into the equation. So what does that mean? That means when the new governor takes office in approximately 11 months, he or she will have to write a new 2-year budget with a hole of about 13% a year built in. That's $2.6 billion. And to give you some other perspective, that's more than 2/3 of the problem Governor Rell left behind for Governor Malloy. And we still don't know if by then we'll have begun the slide into recession, meaning there is the potential for things to get worse. Governor Malloy talked today again about there are few choices left. We already have entered into a concessions agreement with state employees, which means for another 3 years, no governor is going to be able to lay off state employees, which also means the likelihood of any governor getting any further concessions from state employees is very limited because there's no leverage to go get them. And for those who are hoping that maybe we could grow our way out of this mess, I'd like you to consider this, and I'm sorry I'm going to get a little wonky here. During boom times in the 1990s and in the 2000s, the capital gains portion of our income tax, which really does the heavy lifting in good times, it would actually grow on average by about 20% a year for stretches of 4 or 5 years in a row. I mean, the money was coming in wheelbarrows. Since the so-called Great Recession, we have had 1 year of positive double-digit growth, and that was the first year coming out when basically you're correcting from the bottom. Since then, the growth has been anticipated at 2, if we're lucky, maybe 3%. Those retirement benefit costs I talked about right now are already growing, at the same pace as those boom years, and they're expected to, in a few more years, be growing 2, 3, 4 times the level of our best economic growth, which we're not even achieving anymore. So the bill collector is going to be at the door a lot faster than the Department of Revenue Services is bringing in the money. With that as the context, Governor Malloy, and Mark is going to speak about this more, trying to frame his legacy, made some proposals today not to eliminate that huge problem facing the next governor, just to chip away at it. Here are some of the things that he talked about. He wants to restructure payments into the teacher's pension fund, similar to what we did a year ago with the state employees' pension. Think in terms of extending a mortgage. If you went to the bank and said, I need more time, I just can't make my mortgage payment where it is. The bank doesn't offer you a better interest rate, but it just says I'll give you more time. You could do that. The problem is you will end up paying more money in the long run. Like I said, we did that a year ago with the state employee pension payments, and we sent a bill estimated between $14 to $21 billion to the kindergarten classes all over the state. They'll pick up that fee, that expense after 2032. Governor, in addition to saying let's find a way to restructure the teacher pension, has talked about pulling back other tax relief. We have had a very controversial tax on our hospitals for several years now. We asked them to endorse a tax increase in this new budget as a way to leverage more money out of Washington. And then in return for that, we said to the hospitals in 2020, we'll cut your taxes significantly, about $500 million. My words, not Governor Malloy's, but he basically said, come on, that's a pipe dream. We know we're not going to deliver it. Let's basically repeal that relief. Other tax relief that was promised to retirees, to teachers, passed within the last couple of years. They're saying, let's give that up. Let's pull back some additional tax relief promised to businesses because, again, the deficits that we're looking are 4, 5, in some cases 10 and 20 times the level of relief that we promised. We all know we're not going to get to deliver it. So I just want to wrap by saying briefly, it really begs the question right now, will the legislature do anything with this? You have this proposal in an election year, to refresh people's memories, to primarily rely on revenue to close $160, $170 million deficit in the new fiscal year, close $240 million hole this year, And by the way, let's raise taxes to prop up the special transportation fund. And for those who say, well, they can't leave the Capitol in May to run for reelection with a projected deficit. They did it once before. In 2008, legislators were told by nonpartisan analysts, your 2-year budget has a hole in the second year, pretty similar to the one now. It was undisputed. People said, we're going to leave it. We'll deal with it after the election. That's politics. So to explain the politics part at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Mark.
Well, the easy segue is when Keith talked about the question of how much of this stuff will actually be taken up by the legislature. That's the question for really the entire session. There are a couple of things hanging over this session. One is what we always see in the even number years. It's an election. But this is different. If there are any lobbyists on the line, they all know that they are 3-4 months behind in where they would normally be in sitting down with legislators and trying to make inroads on selling them on proposals or playing defense against things that they want to stop. This legislature was tied up into the new year, and there is clearly a fatigue factor. The Senate and House Democratic leaders are having a press conference tomorrow, and the title of the press conference tells you something. They're not talking about their legislative priorities, their legislative to-do list. They're billing this as a discussion of democratic values. So this is going to be very much an aspirational kind of thing, as opposed to in some years we would get a game plan. We would get, when you have the Senate President pro tem and the majority leaders of both chambers and the speaker telling you we're going to do something, you could count on it. In this setting, that is not the case. The Senate obviously is evenly split. It's a narrow House majority, Democratic majority, and there is, again, there will be a discussion of things that they will air, things they will see if they can get support. Some of those things, one of the, I think, progressive caucus priorities is going to be something that has been around for 3 years, and that's the family paid medical leave. That was Senate Bill 1 last year. For those who follow such things, the designation of Senate Bill 1 does not necessarily mean you're going to do well. It actually has it's almost like a curse. But I'm told that most likely family medical leave will be Senate Bill 1 again. This, for those of you who are not that familiar with it, this is less than it sounds. This is not a European social welfare program. This is actually something akin to a disability program, where employees would pay into a fund in the case of a family emergency, parental leave, or a relative who is ill. You could draw on this. This was cutting edge when it first came up in Connecticut 3-4 years ago. It is not today. Rhode Island has a version of this, New York, I believe New Jersey, and certainly California. So this is, again, something the Working Families Party and Labor are pushing. They're hopeful it is actually possible this year. Personally, I have my doubts about that. You'll also see a debate this year on raising the minimum wage. When Connecticut went to a 10-10 minimum wage, and they did so in phases, but the year that the General Assembly adopted this, this was the number, the magic number that Barack Obama was looking for, the federal minimum wage. And Connecticut was the first to put it on the books. There are now other states that have gone past Connecticut. They have passed laws that would phase in over a number of years higher minimum wages all the way up to $15 an hour. New York is among them. You will see that debated this year as well. On tolls that Keith mentioned, there is very much a question as to what is possible this year. The Speaker of the House has promised he will call a vote on tolls. Last year, those of you who closely follow this, we had something I had never seen before, which the speaker would call a bill for a debate of 45 minutes to an hour, but then knowing he didn't have the votes, he would suspend debate. He says this year that will not be the case with tolls. It will go up on the board. I've heard no such promise from Senator Looney or Senator Duff in the Senate Democratic caucus, and obviously there is a ton of opposition from Republicans. Uh, the governor, aside from wanting to exit the Capitol in a year without being tagged with leaving a deficit as large as he inherited, he's going to go back to a couple of his favorite subjects. They're very different subjects, but one is liquor pricing. He has been fighting for free markets most of his time as governor. The cynics have viewed this as, well, he's just siding with big business, such as the change of Total Wines against the mom and pops. But the bottom line is Connecticut liquor prices are heavily regulated due to laws that go back to prohibition. Um, the governor also is going to seek an expansion of the bottle bill. He would make Connecticut certainly the first state in the Northeast. I don't know if there's any place that's done it, but applying a bottle bill provision to liquor and wine, he wants to put a quarter a bottle on it. Quickly says this is unusual, but he would try to more than offset that if he can get rid of the minimum bottle law, which actually props up liquor prices in Connecticut. The other thing the governor has been trying to do really since he took office. Now, this governor who took office with the tiniest of majorities, 6,400 votes, that was the smallest victory going back to the 50s. He has had great successes on criminal justice reforms, whether it be repealing the death penalty, decriminalizing many drug crimes, getting rid of mandatory minimums that really fell heavily on young and minorities on drug crimes. He failed last year on a bill that was, again, cutting edge. It would have expanded the jurisdiction of the juvenile courts. Now, the thought behind this was, how can we save 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds from permanent adult criminal records for things that are relatively minor? Now, this was hailed in Harvard. He was a featured speaker up there, Vin Schiraldi, who is a national thinker on criminal justice issues, juvenile justice issues, thought this was great. The Connecticut General Assembly did not think this was great. Expanding the juvenile courts was seen as too radical, as seen as being far too lenient, even in a state like Connecticut. So the governor, at the end of that session that never seemed it was going to end, had a budget implementer, which was a way to you can achieve major things by slipping something into a budget. He switched fields a little bit. He was trying to achieve the same thing by changing the definition of youthful offender. So it didn't expand the jurisdiction of the juvenile courts. It was not as radical, but it got much the same result. That if you were, a 19-year-old and who did something stupid, even criminal, but not a major thing, that your record would be protected. So I'm told that will be his approach this year. He's going to take one last shot at that. This is a governor who I think in many ways his legacy will involve around criminal justice, around some very progressive policies that have been implemented in the Department of Correction in partnership with Scott Semple, the Correction Commissioner, and with the assistance of many national advocacy groups. By the way, on both the left and the right, this is something that is one of those rare things in U.S. politics right now where there is something of a consensus on both sides for perhaps different reasons. You save a lot of money when you shrink your prison population, and there is a bipartisan consensus that the United States kind of went crazy in the 80s with mandatory minimum sentences, particularly for drugs. and that led to an incredible expansion of prisons in the United States. And Connecticut was part of that. One of the other criminal justice things that they're talking about would be changing the statute of limitations for sexual assaults. Right now, Connecticut has sort of a two-part limitation on that. There's no limit. There's no statute of limits on sexual assaults if the crime was reported within 5 years of its commission and there's DNA evidence. They're looking to broaden that, to have that 5-year period perhaps be longer. This is something that is being debated nationally. This will come before the Judiciary Committee. There's something that'll be fun to watch at the Judiciary Committee. As many of you no doubt know, every committee has 3 co-chairs because the Senate is split. So of the 2 of the 3 co-chairs of the Judiciary Committee are competing with each other for the Democratic nomination for Attorney General. That would be Senator Paul Doyle and Representative William Tong. So it'll be interesting to see any jockeying between those 2. Representative Tong had a press conference today in New Haven, urging passage of a gun control law that would eliminate they're called bump stocks. The governor has already called for this. This is, I have a dog here. Anybody want to see my dog? The bump stocks are what was used in Las Vegas. It basically will turn semi-automatic rifles into the equivalent of a fully automatic rifle. So that is no doubt go through judiciary. We'll see to what extent gun lobby will tie it up. In a short session, it's very easy to kill things simply by talking. So we'll see how that goes. The overall dynamics, again, this is unusual. Going into a session with so little information about what is the hard and fast game plan is something I haven't seen in a long time. But it's a very volatile time politically. The Republicans, even though this is a blue state in federal races, the Republicans are on a winning streak. In 3 of the past 4 statewide elections, they have picked up seats. And that means picking up seats when the top of the ticket went heavily Democratic, whether it's in a presidential year or for governor. And the 4th year, Republicans held fast. It was in a presidential year. They did not lose. So the Republicans thought they were poised to really be in a position to take over both houses. President Trump has thrown all that to the side. We don't know to what extent he will be the countervailing bit of energy. You have Democrats who are energized, particularly women. You have a lot of women who are looking at running or have already declared that they're in the assembly. One other thing I wanted to mention. Oh, yes, gaming. How can I forget gaming? So Connecticut last year had a huge debate about casino expansion. The 2 tribes got authorization from the General Assembly to jointly build a casino in East Windsor to compete with MGM Springfield. That is tied up at the Department of the Interior and in court and probably will remain so. However, the U.S. Supreme Court right now is considering a challenge to a law that really limits sports betting to Las Vegas, to Nevada. And there is a lot of feeling that the court is going to blow that up, that under the 10th Amendment, and that this is not going to stand. So I can tell you that there is great interest in moving quickly in Connecticut to have a debate over sports betting. That would be hugely controversial. It would set up a conflict, no doubt, with the tribes who will claim they have rights to this. But Marty Looney, the Senate President Pro Tem, has already told me that if the Supreme Court knocks down that federal law, he's going to be interested in seeking legalization of sports betting. It's a way to get revenue. And in this day and age, if there's any easy revenue out there that don't involve taxes, this General Assembly is going to be very interested in doing it. So I think that's a a good point to stop. On the other stuff, I will emphasize that on many of these things, it may be a 2-year effort. Oh, by the way, the governor in his budget as an option mentioned legalization of the sale of recreational marijuana. This is something he has not been personally in favor of, but he seems to be taking the position that the General Assembly is certainly going to give it a hard look. Whether that is possible in an election year, I'm quite doubtful about. But I think, again, this is one of those issues you start to have a debate. And they did that last year with an informational hearing. These things usually take a few years. Tolls is also in that category of really trying to vet this so people understand, how it works, how it would not work, and what it means if you don't do it. So I will call it quits there, and we can see what questions are out there. All right, Chris, come over and tell us how to do that.
All right. So we're going to open up to questions from Mark and Keith. You can either type in your questions in the chat box. For some of you, it's going to be to the right of your screen. For others of you, it's going to be in a little thought bubble at the top of your screen. If you're on the phone, feel free to just fire away your questions, and we'll do our best to moderate between phone and chat. Any questions?
Okay, I have a question about the transportation lockbox.
Go
Is there
ahead.
going to be a referendum on that?
Yes, that is as a result of successive votes of the General Assembly. That will be on the ballot this November.
Okay.
And I wouldn't be surprised as part of the debate that perhaps people will suggest that because you can't enact tolls immediately, that you may see language saying that it's conditioned on passage of the lockbox. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there any realistic way that you have heard you could solve the long-term budget deficit problem? Yeah.
Okay. There are a lot of realistic ways that you can solve. I'm sorry. The question was: is there any realistic way that you could solve the long-term deficit? Yes. I think the real question is there any realistic way that doesn't hurt like crazy? And that's where the answer is no. You are literally now talking about mitigating a painful situation. I use this term a lot in talks. To a certain extent, the culture in the legislature is changing, and they're the people who said, I will only go to the dentist if I can have a good root canal, are starting to learn that's an oxymoron. I mean, you're talking again about something that went from eating up 12% of the general fund 20 years ago, 33% now, and is expected to explode. And I would point out that about 85% of this fast-growing part of the budget does not involve people who are on the job today. We're not talking about saving for present-day teachers. We're not talking about putting aside money so when the present-day state employees retire, the money's there for them. We're talking about making up money that the state of Connecticut should have been putting aside for people who provided services to our parents and in some cases our grandparents. So it's almost like you're trying to return groceries that were served at a party 30 years ago. The food's been eaten, the booze has been consumed, the guests have gone home, and all that's left is to pay the caterer. We can do things to try to mitigate that, but unless Connecticut thinks a federal judge is going to tell the wealthiest state and the wealthiest nation in the world, you don't have to pay your bills because you might experience an economic slump and it might make you less affluent than another state and you wouldn't have your top ranking. it's not going to hold up. And I don't mean to be flip about it, but I do think there needs to be some more sober thinking that there really just is not a positive outcome out of this so much as there is. We have to strategically plan so that when the pain is over, you're best positioned to grow again.
And, you know, if you're tuning into something like this, you're probably more aware of this problem, but it's not, it won't hurt for me to emphasize that this issue, things get confused quickly. So people hear there's a pension problem, and they quite reasonably say, then why don't we negotiate with employees to change the system so it's affordable? But to Keith's point, we're really talking about the people who are long retired. The current employees, through a series of actions, you know, some going back to Jody Rell, but Governor Malloy twice has negotiated concessions. The normal cost of retirement for current employees is not it's not as crazy as it once was. I mean, this used to be a super gold-plated package of benefits. We are now at the point where it is more competitive. You could still debate whether it should be tweaked. I think employee contributions are still less than the kind of the norm nationally. But the bottom line is things like retirement age and other things, they are now in line so that this system is not, if you were starting today with current employees with what the state is putting in and what the employees are putting in, it's something that is sustainable. Whereas, unfortunately, we're dealing with 30, 40 years, and until somebody comes up with a time machine to go back to 1960, 1970 and change some of these things, this is a problem that you can spread out the payments, but you cannot make them go away.
It's interesting.
Any other questions?
Does anyone else have any questions?
They'd like to ask by chat or by phone.
That's a
That's your field. All right. Another question that says, what difference do you think it would make in policy budget legislation if there was a Republican or Democratic governor and legislative majority? The first time, the Republicans, by and large, who are running for governor, have taken a really hard position that's different from the Democrats on the question of employee wage compensation. 4 years ago, when Governor Walker of Wisconsin was the keynote speaker at the Prescott Bush dinner, the big Republican dinner, I asked all the candidates or potential candidates for governor if Governor Walker was offering any kind of template for Connecticut. And Governor Walker, of course, blew out collective bargaining for public employees in Wisconsin. It's more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, that's what he did. And he did that in a state where AFSCME, perhaps the largest public sector in the United States, really had its own. So that was quite a political fight and a real change in political tides. And again, 4 years ago, Republicans running for governor, they acted like a scalded cat when I came to them with that question. This year, at the two forums that the Republican Party has held for their candidates so far, most, if not all of them, in one way or another, have embraced the idea of taking certain employee benefits, particularly retirement benefits, away from collective bargaining. Do what most other states do and set it by statute. And again, this would be going forward. You can't go back and by statute suddenly get rid of the debt that Keith talked about a minute ago. So that would be a big difference. Where I'm not sure it would be a big difference, we do see a reluctance in both parties to look to the Connecticut taxpayer or the receiver of services and say, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we cannot afford to do some of the things we have been doing for years, whether that is addressing the parents of young adult children with intellectual disabilities and saying we're no longer going to have certain programs past the age of 21, for example. There is a reluctance to, when it comes to shrinking state government and the size of the budget, there is a great reluctance to give people bad news. And we saw that with the Republican budget. I mean, these were more fiscally conservative people, but the budget that they passed with the help of a handful of Democrats, and I'm not talking about the bipartisan one that was eventually became law, but they engaged in some of the gimmicks that we've seen for decades. There was a major deferral of pension contributions in that budget. So that raises the question: if we get a Republican legislature and a Republican governor, to what extent it will really be changed when it comes to those hard decisions of telling people, as we saw recently with the Medicare savings program. The governor actually defended a cut that was, they tightened eligibility for Medicare assistance. This is a program where the state kicks in some money for people who are really, really in need and helps them with copays and other things. And Connecticut in 2010 had made the program more generous. Part of the bipartisan budget that was signed into law tightened those eligibility requirements, and people went crazy. And the legislature flinched. Republicans and Democrats, they said, no, we're going to change this, and they did. So that's my long-winded answer to suggesting that maybe a Republican takeover would not be as dramatic as we think. But bottom line is they are certainly talking about doing things differently when it comes to collective bargaining. And I think that would probably happen if there was a GOP takeover.
Collective bargaining.
Okay. So you don't have to oops. So can you?
I can see it if you can't.
Here we go. Too much feedback. Go ahead, Keith.
Okay. We have a question that asks us about revenue shortfalls, and the question of wealthy individuals leaving the state. Sorry, it's a long question. It's a good one. I just want to make sure I get it all. They're asking about how Connecticut has been sort of plagued by wishful thinking in the past, very rosy revenue forecasts that don't live up to expectations. And then is that compounded by the idea of wealthy individuals leaving the state? They also ask about people cashing in on their capital gains, limited job growth. So I'll try to address all of that. There is a lot of I think what legislators would call anecdotal evidence. I'll say a lot of stories that people bring back from their districts about wealthy people leaving the state. I have no doubt that there are some people leaving the state, and that includes some wealthy folks. Right now, if you look at the data from the State Department of Revenue Services, if you look at the number of households that are reporting earnings in excess of $1 million, if you look at their aggregate earnings, so you total them all up and you figured how much did they add, all of that is one of the fastest growing areas, probably since about 2000. It's still not growing as fast in recent years as we would like it. But if you look at the census data, where most of our exodus is coming from, it's coming from college graduates. I think the bigger problem, because as much as people may talk about the options that the wealthy have and how they can speak with their accountant if they have multiple homes and change their residency, you still are tethered to a certain degree to Wall Street. It's not that there is more flexibility than there used to be, but the bottom line is you can only take it so far. And even though there are many states without an income tax, almost all the migration that we do see is to Florida, which says to me it's as driven by the climate as anything else. I think the more interesting question, by the way, or part of this question is they're asking what's going on with capital gains. We did get some news in January that it looked for the first time like state income tax receipts had surged to the tune of about $600 million, based almost entirely on the quarterly payments that people make on capital gains, dividends, and other investment-related income. The problem is most of the evidence we're hearing from the Department of Revenue Services, from nonpartisan analysts, is people see that as an advance on money that folks otherwise would have paid in April. They paid the money in December to try to maximize their state tax payments to take advantage of the outgoing federal income tax system before things change. I would also just lastly point out, we've seen, with the exception of the last couple of days though, I mean, we've seen tremendous growth in the Dow Jones Industrial Average since the last bear market, basically almost a decade ago. But there have been a lot of factors that have undercut the growth in the capital gains part of our income tax. One would think that over this period of time, we would have had several times when that portion of our income tax stream took off, and it simply hasn't. We know that dividends aren't happening like they used to. We know that the financial services sector has scaled back considerably, and we also know investor confidence is really shaken. That's not. I think the governor spoke today and said that's not to say we're convinced Connecticut will never return to those days again. But what I am saying, the days of just saying if we just have one good April, 2 good Aprils, our problems are solved. We're not looking at anything close to that, because simply the amount of money we owe in the next decade and a half is really coming to a head.
And there's no question that Connecticut was seen as, prior to the income tax, Connecticut was seen in the tri-state area as a tax haven of sorts. So, I mean, that's a real thing. There's also other factors. In the 70s, when Connecticut was getting a lot of people moving in from, or I should say companies moving in from New York, that was at a time when there were companies fleeing New York City. That the cities had become seen as dangerous, as places that companies wanted to flee. So, GE, they weren't in Manhattan, but when they were looking for a new headquarters, they came to a suburban office building, campus, I should say, in Fairfield. Those are not in vogue now, and that's one of many factors that have been harming Connecticut. Taxes and to the extent to which the state is competitive, obviously are an issue. But there are other things that millennials are looking to be in cities. Connecticut is a state that has small to medium cities at best. New Jersey has struggled with this as well. Companies are looking at places they can attract millennials, particularly in the tech areas, and that's another challenge for Connecticut as well. Anything else? You're welcome. All right.
All right. Well, if no one else has any other questions, we will wrap it up. I want to thank Mark and Keith for your time tonight and your expertise, as always. And to all of you for joining us tonight and for being such committed supporters to the Mirror. And we look forward to seeing you at a future live or online event. And in the meantime, the session starts Wednesday, and you're hearing a lot more from Mark and Keith and the rest of our staff on the Mirror. So thanks. Have a great night.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.